Unfortunately, what we have now in Germany is, I would say, an almost schizophrenic situation in that, in principle, the majority of the population and also the majority of the centrist parties and the major opposition party and the governmental parties are all in favor of supporting Ukraine, and Germany is indeed supporting Ukraine also with weaponry, with heavy weaponry, especially with anti-aircraft weapons. But on the other hand, there is a public opinion now, also a majority in Germany, that is strictly against the provision of these cruise missiles Taurus for Ukraine, which Ukraine has requested, because apparently these cruise missiles have characteristics that make them superior to the so far received somewhat similar missiles, Storm Shadow, Scalp, and ATACMS from the US. So there is this spat now already for many months between Germany and Ukraine about these Taurus missiles. And unfortunately, there's no movement forward. And my feeling is also that at least as long as Olaf Scholz will remain Chancellor, there will be no movement forward because he has digged himself now in rather deeply. And so he has said many times that Germany will not provide this weapon, and Germany is supporting Ukraine in other ways, also through the European Union. Much of the, or a large part of the money that comes to Ukraine from the European Union is de facto German money. But concerning this particular type of weaponry, Germany is not going forward. And also Germany, but also other countries, they are not providing so far Ukraine with the permission to use long-range weaponry on legitimate Russian state territory. And the German position here is not so important because Germany has not provided so much long-range weaponry as, let's say, the Brits or the French or the Americans. But still, it's also an odd position, and it simply is an expression, I think, of fear, plain fear of escalation, of being drawn into this war, of World War III, of nuclear escalation. And so there's now this fear that has become the major factor in support of Russia and against Ukraine. Although most of the people, both in the political elite and in the population, are actually pro-Ukrainian and anti-Putin, if not anti-Russian. But still, they are not ready to provide this permission and certain weapons because they fear that this will draw them into this war and will escalate into World War III. Yeah, I think what becomes to me more and more important is that we switch from a debate about values and empathy and solidarity and justice and human rights and democracy, freedom and so on, to a more sort of cynical, you could say, argument about the importance of Ukraine and the survival of Ukraine and territorial integrity, national sovereignty of Ukraine for the international security system, in particular for the non-proliferation regime, for nuclear weapons, also for other weapons of mass destruction. And that if this war is won by Russia in one way or another, or if Ukraine comes out with less territory, with less sovereignty from this war, this will be very dangerous for not only Eastern Europe, but also for the entire world, because that will basically then undermine the whole logic of the non-proliferation regime. Ukraine is an official non-nuclear weapon state in the non-proliferation treaty, and Russia is an official nuclear weapon state also in the non-proliferation treaty. Moreover, Russia has given in 1994 to Ukraine's so-called security assurances or security guarantees in the now infamous Budapest Memorandum, which is an addendum to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so, the odd thing that we have now is that the international system, as it is now built, the UN system with Russia in the Security Council and a veto power, and also the non-proliferation regime, which forbids Ukraine to have nuclear weapons and allows Russia explicitly to have nuclear weapons. The international security system is supporting this war of annihilation and genocide, and this terroristic war against a civilian population. And that would then be also a very dangerous signals around the world and could lead to destabilization in regions which have nothing to do with Ukraine, and where perhaps currently the leaders of these nations in Asia, Africa, or Latin America, they may be looking at this war with a certain Schadenfreude, with a certain satisfaction that there are two white nations fighting each other, and and this is all very embarrassing for the West, and Russia is sort of making gains and is sort of partly winning in this war. But if Russia indeed wins in this war, I think many in the world don't understand what that actually means for the international security system, because that means then that international law, international organizations, and international solidarity cannot be relied on, and that basically all countries are on themselves. And the Western countries have largely solved this problem for themselves because they have a very powerful military alliance, NATO. Also, the US has given security guarantees to other countries that have thereby at least partly resolved their security issues. But most countries in the world do not have such a big ally as the US, and are not part of an organization comparable to NATO. And so they will then all be on their own. And that is basically then a new world in which we would be living. And that is why, in a way, the countries of the so-called Global South should be more interested in a Ukrainian victory in this war than the West. But in fact, what we have is the opposite situation, that the Global South is ambivalent or even pro-Russian, and the West is supportive of Ukraine, although the destructive repercussions would be much more dangerous for countries that are not members of the NATO alliance or do not have security guarantees from the US or another nuclear superpower. Yes, there is a sort of a talk at many conferences and at sort of meetings, often on the sidelines and not in the official conference debate, that actually a loss of Russia, a victory of Ukraine in this war is insofar not desired, because what then many fear is that this would lead to a destabilization of Putin's regime, and if Putin regimes destroys itself, then this may also lead to the destruction of the Russian Federation. And what is here, of course, also very suggestive is that if Ukraine regains the occupied territories, then these are still territories officially under the Russian constitution, territories of the Russian Federation. And so if you then have a sort of situation in which Ukraine is winning, Russia is entering an economic crisis, Russia has a political crisis, then certain regions in Russia could say, well, if Crimea is left to go to another country, or Donetsk Oblast, why are we not also free to go somewhere else? Yeah. So this is now actually this sort of virus that Putin has introduced into the Russian Constitution and Russian Federation with the annexations of 2014, first of Crimea, and then in 2022 of 4 mainland regions in southeastern Ukraine. So I think the fear of this falling apart of Russia is justified. There's now actually a major Russian historian, Alexander Etkin, has come out with the assertion that Russia could self-destroy itself by this war, and he compares Russia's paradoxical behavior to that of Austria-Hungary in 1914, which started, you could argue, World War I, and the same Austro-Hungarian Empire that started World War I then fell apart as a result of World War I. So Alexander Etkin has sort of compared this to what may happen to Russia. And that may be also a factor that is sort of constraining the Western help for Ukraine, in that the West does not want, may not, or some people at least in the West may not actually want a crushing Ukrainian victory, because they fear the domestic political repercussions in Russia and self-destruction of Russia. But we had already the self-destruction of the USSR in 1991, and nothing extraordinary happened, at least at that time, out of this. The nuclear weaponry stayed under control, and so I don't think that there is actually a big risk here, and it's all overdrawn. I would hope that this involvement now of North Korea, direct involvement of North Korea, not just with ammunition, but also with soldiers in this war, will help to reconsider this whole war in Western Europe and in North America and around the world. Because what we now have is that Russia is now, Ukraine is now fighting 2 nuclear weapon states, an official nuclear weapon state under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Russia, and a nuclear weapon state outside the non-proliferation regime, North Korea. And this alliance, one could now say, after they've signed a treaty, and after it has been decided that now also soldiers will apparently go to the front line, North Korean soldiers, this alliance is supported de facto by another nuclear weapon state, China, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and also by a forthcoming, perhaps, a future nuclear weapon state, Iran, which is also developing nuclear weaponry. And so, I mean, the situation is becoming more and more scandalous about the international security system. It looks more and more as if the security system that has emerged after 1945 does not count at all, and that it's actually producing insecurity rather than security with its peculiar rules. I think the situation is very sort of ambivalent, because many experts, also a whole number of politicians, I see that in Germany, do actually understand that this is now a new era. We are in a different world. But a part of the political elite, the Social Democrats, and especially the far right and the far left, they still live in this, so to say, pre-2014 world, pre-annexation world, and they still want to go back to the good old times. And unfortunately, also the electorate has not, in many Western countries, has not understood that, and the politicians, that we are living now in a different world, and the politicians, of course, they don't listen to the experts. They listen to what the electorate wants and And some of the politicians are very ineffective in explaining to the electorate that we are now in a different world and then that things need to be done differently. Scholz has been criticized many times already that he is not performing as a politician, and that he does not explain to the German electorate what the situation is. And the situation is actually even more odd in that the one social democratic politician who is more forthcoming and who is obviously more in support of Ukraine than, let's say, Scholz and the majority of the Social Democratic Party, which is the Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius. He, as a social democrat and as a defense minister, is the most popular politician now in Germany, Pistorius, with his rather hawkish rhetoric. So you can be hawkish, you can tell the electorate the bitter truth, you can be very forward-leaning, and that will make you popular. And that is not a problem for a politician. On the contrary, it's for Pistorius, it's a big plus. And nevertheless, the Social Democrats, they are still living in this old world. You know, they have certain myths about their success in the 1970s with the Soviet Union when under the Chancellor Brandt and Schmidt. And so they live in a sort of, in a parallel, in a la-la land, you could say. And as I said, I mean, basically most of the major parties and institutes and social organizations are pro-Ukrainian, at least, you know, in Germany. They are not pro-Russian, or at least not pro-Putin anymore. And there is a major change in the German perception of Eastern Europe, but so far that has only led to an insufficient change in foreign policies and in economic policies and so on. And Scholz has announced the so-called Zeitenwende, the change of times, the change of era, of epochs. And he has actually announced that there is a new era, and he has sort of acknowledged that. But the policies have not changed adequately to the degree that is necessary. They have changed, and they have largely changed in the right direction, but not adequate to the situation.